The story is titled, Freedom Felt Like Dying. The man who broke out only to turn himself in. The first thing you lose isn't your freedom. It's the illusion that you are a person. It happens the second the transport bus crosses the perimeter of Ironwood Correctional, a sprawling scar of concrete and razor wire tucked into the gray, freezing hills of upstate New York. I remember the sound of the air brakes hissing, a long, dying breath that signaled the end of my life as Arne Sullivan, 44, male. I was just a number now, a file in a cabinet, a body to be counted at 5 a.m. and locked away at 9 p.m. I didn't kill the guard. That's what I told my lawyer, my ex-wife, and the ceiling of my holding cell for 6 months. I was the driver. I was sitting in the idling sedan, listening to the rain tap against the windshield, when the shots rang out inside the bank. But in the eyes of the state, when you participate in a felony and a body drops, you pulled the trigger. 25 years to life. When the judge said it, I didn't cry. I just felt a heavy, cold stone settle in my stomach, a weight that hasn't moved since. Processing was a factory line of humiliation. We were stripped naked, 12 of us in a freezing tiled room that smelled of bleach and unwashed crotches. Lift your sack, squat and cough, open your mouth. The guards barked orders like we were cattle, their eyes bored, looking through us, not at us. They took my clothes, the last things I owned that fit me, and gave me stiff, oversized blues that smelled like industrial detergent and someone else's sweat. I was assigned to C Block, Tier 2, Cell 214. Walking onto the tier felt like walking into the throat of a beast. The noise was physical, a wall of sound made of slamming steel, shouting men, the crackle of radios, and the constant low-frequency hum of tension. It smelled of cheap ramen, floor wax, and aggressive desperation. Every pair of eyes that landed on me was calculating, weighing my worth, checking to see if I was prey or a threat. I kept my head down, clutching my bedroll like a shield. My cellmate was already there, lying on the bottom bunk, staring at the underside of the top rack. Marcus T-Bone, Willis, 38, male, didn't look up when I walked in. He was a mountain of a man, skin the color of obsidian, with a jagged scar running from his ear to his jawline, a souvenir from a riot in Attica years ago. Top bunk, Marcus said. His voice was like grinding gravel. You don't snore. You don't piss in the night unless you sit down. And you don't talk to me unless the building is on fire. Understood, I whispered. Speak up, he snapped, finally turning his head. His eyes were yellowed, hard as marbles. Whispering makes people think you're plotting. Plotting gets you stabbed. Speak like a man or shut the hell up. Understood, I said, louder this time, my voice cracking just enough to shame me. That first night was an eternity. The lights in the block never truly go out. They just dim to a sickly amber glow that casts long, twitching shadows against the cracked cinder block walls. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the graffiti scratched into the paint above me. Initials, dates, prayers, curses. The prison breathed around me. Somewhere down the tier, a man was screaming, a rhythmic sobbing howl that went on for hours. No one told him to shut up. It was just part of the soundtrack. I tried to close my eyes, but the panic hit me in waves. It wasn't the fear of violence. Not yet. It was the crushing realization of time. 25 years. 9,125 days. I could feel the walls pressing in, physically squeezing the air out of my lungs. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I got up to pace, 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, but Marcus shifted on the bunk below, a warning rustle of sheets. I froze. I sat on the edge of the metal toilet, head in my hands, listening to the screaming man fade into a whimper. I was buried alive. The world outside, the rain, the traffic, the taste of coffee, the smell of my daughter's hair, it was all gone. All that was left was this cage, the smell of steel, and the cold certainty that I would die in this box. That night I didn't sleep. I just watched the amber light flicker, waiting for a morning that promised nothing but the same hell, over and over again. This wasn't life. This was just breathing while you waited for the end. You don't survive Ironwood by fighting. You survive by becoming part of the concrete. You learn the rhythm of the boots on the catwalk, the specific metallic clang of the chow hall gates, and the exact temperature of the water in the showers, depending on which tier flushes their toilets first. If you stand out, you get crushed. If you disappear, you might just rot slowly enough to endure it. 6 months in, the numbness I felt on arrival had curdled into a hard, gray routine. I secured a job in the industrial laundry, Sector 4. It was the bowels of the prison, a cavernous, windowless hellscape of roaring tumblers, hissing steam presses, an air so thick with lint and humidity you had to chew it to breathe. It paid 40 cents an hour. It kept my hands busy and my mind off the 24 and a half years I had left. The laundry was also the domain of Officer Miller, 32, male, a man with a buzz cut so tight his scalp shone pink under the fluorescence. Miller didn't just hate inmates. He was bored by us, which was worse. Boredom made him creative. He'd stand by the folding tables, tapping his baton against his thigh, waiting for a shirt to be folded a fraction of an inch off-center so he could knock the entire stack onto the wet floor. "Pick it up, Sully," he'd say, his voice flat, eyes dead. "Do it again, cleaner." I'd pick it up. I'd fold it again. I learned to swallow my rage until it felt like a stone in my throat. In here, pride is a luxury you sell for a pack of cigarettes or a moment of peace. Back in cell 214, Marcus and I had developed a language of silence. We weren't friends. Friendship implies trust, and trust gets you killed. But we were allies in the war against space. We moved around each other like dancers in a phone booth. He taught me how to make a stinger to boil water using nail clippers and a wire. And I taught him how to fix the radio when the signal died. "Miller's looking for a reason," Marcus grunted one night, laying out a game of solitaire on his bunk. "He's got that look, like a kid pulling wings off a fly. Don't give him the excuse." "I don't say a word to him," I whispered, staring at the ceiling. "Doesn't matter. You're quiet. Quiet guys piss him off. He thinks you think you're better than him." Marcus paused, slapping a jack of spades onto the mattress. "Everyone breaks, Sully. The trick is to break in private." The breaking point, or the beginning of it, came on a Tuesday. One of the massive industrial dryers, Unit 7, jammed. It was a beast of a machine, bolted to the floor, big enough to roast a man alive. The maintenance crew was backed up on a lockdown in D block, so the civilian supervisor told me to clear the lint trap from the rear access panel. I squeezed into the narrow crawl space behind the line of dryers. The noise back there was deafening, a mechanical roar that vibrated in my teeth. It was hot, dark, and filthy. I had to shimmy on my stomach through grease and ancient dust bunnies the size of rats. When I reached Unit 7, I saw it. The vibration of the machines over the decades had done something the architects hadn't planned for. The mortar around the waste pipe, a rusted iron monstrosity that vanished into the wall, had crumbled. It wasn't a hole to the outside. It was just a gap, barely wide enough for a hand, leading into the darkness between the prison's inner and outer walls. I froze. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the concrete floor. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the crumbling brick. It was loose. I pulled a piece away. It came out with a puff of gray dust. Behind it was a draft, a cold, faint draft that smelled of rain and rot. For the first time in months, the air in my lungs didn't feel recycled. I jammed the brick piece back in, packed the dust around it with spit and grease to hide the crack, and finished clearing the lint trap. I crawled back out, covered in grime, my hands shaking so hard I had to clench them into fists to hide it. When I stood up, Miller was there. He smirked, wrinkling his nose at my filth. "Look at you," he sneered. "Finally look like you belong here, Sully. Like garbage." He kicked my shin, hard with the toe of his boot. Pain shot up my leg, blinding and sharp. 6 months ago, I would have swung at him. 6 months ago, I was a man. But now I had a secret. I had a draft of cold air behind a wall. I looked at the floor, grit my teeth, and said, "Yes, sir." That night, lying in the dark, the noise of the cell block faded. I wasn't thinking about my appeal anymore. I wasn't thinking about justice. I was thinking about the 6 inches of masonry between the waste pipe and the utility chase. I was thinking about spoons, about metal shims, about how long it takes to scrape through concrete without making a sound. The plan wasn't fully formed. It was just a terrifying, fragile ember. But for the first time since the judge slammed his gavel, I wasn't just waiting to die. I was working. Hope is a parasite. It burrows into you, eating the numbness that keeps you sane, leaving raw, exposed nerves in its wake. For 3 months, I fed that parasite with grit and plaster dust. The laundry room became my entire universe. I worked like a machine, head down, folding sheets with precision, just to buy myself 10 minutes of invisibility behind Unit 7. My tool was a piece of metal I'd worked loose from a broken mop bucket, 3 inches of jagged steel I kept taped to the inside of my thigh. Every time I shimmied into that crawl space, the heat was suffocating, thick with lint and the metallic tang of old grease. I scraped at the mortar around the pipe, terrified that the screech of metal on stone would cut through the roar of the tumblers. I learned to carry the wall out in my pockets, a handful of dust at a time, flushed down the staff toilet when I was sent to mop it. My hands were permanently gray, the dust settling into the whorls of my fingerprints. I stopped sleeping. Every time the tier gate slammed at night, I flinched, waiting for Miller to drag me out, waiting for the baton to crack my ribs. Marcus knew. He had to. You don't live in a 6x8 cage with a man and not smell the fear on him. He never said a word about the dust on my blues or the way I stared at the ventilation grate, but he started covering for me. If a guard walked by during count, Marcus would be standing at the bars, filling the doorway with his massive shoulders, blocking the view just enough. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came on a Thursday afternoon, with a clipboard. I was loading Unit 5 when Miller walked in, trailing a civilian contractor in a yellow vest. They stopped right in front of Unit 7. My blood turned to ice. "This is the one," Miller said, kicking the base of the dryer. "Vibrates like hell. Bearings are shot. We need it pulled out and replaced." The contractor nodded, checking his watch. "I can get a crew in here Monday morning. We'll yank it out, check the hookups behind it." Monday, 3 days. The world tilted. Monday meant they would pull the machine. They would see the hole. They would see the pile of debris I hadn't managed to clear yet. They would lock down the facility, and I would spend the next 10 years in solitary confinement, rotting in a concrete box until I forgot my own name. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was an eviction. I waited until Friday, the last shift of the week. The laundry room was chaos, steam rising from the presses, carts clattering, inmates shouting over the noise. I caught Marcus's eye across the room. He was folding towels, his movements slow, rhythmic. He looked at me, then at the clock, then back at me. He stopped folding. He knew. He walked over to the supply cage and knocked a 5-gallon drum of industrial bleach off the shelf. It hit the floor with a gunshot crack, splitting open. Fumes erupted, acrid and blinding. "Oh, hell!" Marcus shouted, his voice booming over the machinery. "Spill! We got a spill!" Miller spun around, face twisting in anger. "Willis, you clumsy ox! Everyone back! Get the fans!" The room dissolved into coughing and confusion. Inmates scattered away from the chemical puddle. Miller moved toward Marcus, baton unholstered, screaming orders. It was the only grace I would ever get. I dropped my laundry cart and slid behind the row of dryers. The heat back there was instantaneous, a physical blow. I crawled on my belly, the sharp edges of the machinery tearing at my uniform. When I reached Unit 7, I didn't hesitate. I jammed my shoulder against the loose brickwork I'd been weakening for weeks. I shoved. It gave way, not silently, but with a dull, heavy thud that was swallowed by the chaos outside. I squeezed through the hole, the jagged masonry scraping the skin off my back. I fell forward into the darkness of the utility chase, a vertical shaft of pipes and dripping water that ran between the walls. It smelled of sewage and ancient trapped air. I couldn't look back. If I did, I would see the light from the laundry room, the life I was leaving. I would think about Marcus taking the beatdown that was meant for me. I pulled the loose bricks back into place as best I could, sealing myself in the dark. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would echo through the vents. I was out of the cell, out of the laundry, but I wasn't free. I was inside the skeleton of the prison now. I looked up. Far above, maybe 3 stories, a grate filtered a weak gray light. Rain. I put my hands on the rusted pipes, slick with condensation, and began to climb. Every muscle screamed, my fingers slipping on the slime. Below me was darkness. Above me was a terrifying, impossible vertical mile. I climbed until my arms shook, until the noise of the prison below faded into a dull, distant hum. I was a rat in the walls, and the only way out was up, into the storm. The rain on the roof didn't feel like baptism. It felt like buckshot. When I finally shoved the rusted ventilation grate aside and hauled myself out onto the tar-papered roof of the laundry block, the wind hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was 40 feet up, blinded by the storm, shivering in a uniform that was already soaked through. The perimeter lights were blurred halos in the downpour, swinging violently in the gale. I didn't feel triumph. I felt exposed. Inside, I was a rat in a wall. Out here, I was a smudge against the sky, waiting to be erased. I scrambled across the slick roof toward the loading dock overhang. The drop was 15 feet to the top of a dumpster, then another 10 to the asphalt. I didn't think. I just let gravity take me. I hit the metal lid of the dumpster with a bone-jarring crash that should have woken the dead, but the thunder masked it. I rolled off, hitting the wet pavement hard, my ankle twisting with a sickening pop. Pain was just information now. I limped toward the service gate. The storm had knocked out the motion sensors. Marcus had predicted that, or maybe he just prayed for it. I squeezed under the gap where the drainage culvert met the chain link, tearing my back open again, and crawled into the woods. I ran until the lights of Ironwood were just a dull orange glow behind the trees. I ran until my lungs burned like they were filled with acid. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and then I walked, stumbling through the freezing mud of the state forest. For 3 days I was free, and for 3 days I learned that prison isn't just a building, it's a condition. I raided a hunting cabin on the second night, breaking a window with a rock. I found a flannel shirt, a stale box of crackers, and a heavy wool coat. I huddled in the corner of that stranger's kitchen, eating the crackers with trembling hands, flinching at the sound of the wind in the chimney. I had the clothes, I had the food, I had the distance, but I couldn't stop checking the door. Every shadow was Miller. Every creak of the floorboards was the tactical team. The silence of the woods wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, pregnant with the threat of discovery. I realized then that I hadn't left the cell. I had just expanded its walls to the horizon. My mind was still back in Block C, counting the seconds, waiting for the bell. On the third morning, I walked into a small town 10 miles from the Canadian border. It was a Sunday. People were walking to church. I saw a man buying a newspaper. I saw a woman laughing into a cell phone. They looked like a different species. They walked with a lightness I couldn't comprehend, their bodies soft and unguarded. I caught my reflection in the window of a hardware store. I looked feral. My eyes were hollowed out, dark pits of exhaustion. I wasn't Arne Sullivan anymore. I wasn't even inmate 8940. I was a ghost haunting a world that didn't know I existed. I thought about Marcus. I pictured him in the hole, stripped, beaten, paying the price for the bleach and the distraction. He had given me this life, and I was wasting it on terror. I tried to imagine the future, a life of fake names, cash jobs, sleeping with one eye open, never speaking to my daughter again. I realized I was already dead. The man who went into prison died the day he arrived. The thing that climbed out of the wall was just a vessel for fear. I walked past the hardware store. I walked past the diner that smelled of bacon and coffee, a smell that made my stomach cramp with longing. I walked 2 blocks down to the brick building with the flag out front. The lobby was warm. That was the first thing I noticed. It smelled of floor wax, just like the prison, but cleaner. The deputy behind the high desk was young, maybe 25, drinking a Monster energy drink and reading a magazine. He didn't look up when I entered. "Help you?" he mumbled. I stood there, the wool coat dripping rainwater onto the tile. The silence in my head finally stopped. The siren that had been wailing in my brain for 72 hours cut out. "I'm tired," I said. My voice was raspy, unused. The deputy looked up then, really looked at me. He saw the scars. He saw the prison blues peeking out from under the stolen flannel. He saw the exhaustion that went deeper than bone. His eyes went wide and his hand dropped to his holster. Don't, I said softly. I raised my hands not in surrender, but in relief. I'm not fighting. I'm just done. Name? He stammered, standing up, knocking his chair back. Sullivan, I whispered. Arne. Tell them the laundry is piling up. I turned around and put my hands behind my back, interlacing my fingers the way I'd been trained to do for years. I closed my eyes and listened to the click of the handcuffs. It sounded like a lock turning. It sounded like home.